Shalom, guys. Welcome back to another episode here at Just Shavyu Ministries with Casa de Yarah. Thank you again for being there. Like I always say, if you like the content that we have in our channel, like and subscribe. If you have questions, comments, concerns, put them in the comment section down below. So, we're going to pick up from last week's Torah portion Balach. I wasn't able to upload last week. I had some technical difficulties with my video. Basically edited, was ready to upload. All I had to do was export, and I went to do something, came back, and Premiere Pro crashed. So, yeah, sorry I wasn't able to bring a video last week. So this week we're gonna try to recap and then see how can we elaborate a little more on the story of Pinchas, because Pinchas is a very controversial one, right? You would say that as a consensus or as a whole, the story will be seen as good, right? Because Pinchas represents someone that defended God's honor and was able to ransom for his people, but there's parts of even the Jewish brothers in the Talmud have opinions about this, especially the people or the brothers from the lineage of Simeonites. Sorry, I'm probably saying that wrong, but they have an opinion that it was more of a personal thing than of a desire to defend God's honor. Obviously, we won't get into that. But again, this is a story that's very controversial, right? Because you see this man, he kills this couple that is about to dishonor God's image and God's presence in God's camp among the peoples. And so we'll elaborate on that. We're going to talk about last week's Torah portion, at least the ending, which is the introduction of this Torah portion. And then we pick up with Pinchas. So let's do a Torah blessing, and we will continue. Baruch Adonai HaMevorah, Baruch Adonai HaMevorah le'olam ba'e, Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bahar banu mikol ha'amim benatan lanu et Torato, Baruch Ata Adonai noten haTorah. Bless Adonai who is blessed. Blessed is Adonai who is blessed now and forever. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who has chosen us from among the peoples and has given us the Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, who gives the Torah. Amen. So like I said, this week's Torah portion is Pinchas, right? And Pinchas, as we'll show here, Pinchas starts in Numbers 25, verse 10. Through chapter 30, verse 1. The Haftarah portion of the prophet's portion is 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 46 to chapter 19, 21. And the Brit Hadashah portion is Revelations chapter 19, verse 11 through 21. The outline for this week's Torah portion is Phinehas is rewarded for his righteous zeal. Yarah commands Israel to be hostile to the Midians. A new census of Israel is taken, the count of the Levites, the grievance of Zelophehad's daughters, and the resulting laws of inheritance. Yarah shows Moses the promised land, right, that he's not able to go in. Moses asks for a successor, and the continual and daily Tamid offerings, the additional Musaf offerings of the weekly and annual Shabbats. The covenant of peace is something that is very interesting in this Torah portion. And so last week's Torah portion, Balak introduced to us the story of Phinehas or Pinchas, depending on what Bible you're reading, the son of Eleazar, the priest and grandson of Aaron, who during the rebellion at Baal Peor was zealously removed the evil from Israel by driving a spear through a tribal prince who was brazenly cavorting with a Midianite princess in defiance of God's law. On account of Pinchas' seal for the Torah, God stopped the plague and Israel was delivered from destruction. This week's Torah portion of Pinchas begins with the Lord rewarding Pinchas by granting him a covenant of peace and officially promising to incorporate him into the priestly line of Israel. This promise was remarkable because Pinchas was technically not qualified to be a priest, since he was already born when the original promise was given to Aaron and his sons, since his father Eleazar was married to an outsider, namely the daughter of Jethro, also called Putuel. And so Pinchas is also a guard of the tabernacle, right? He had a duty of defending the tabernacle and protecting the entrances of it. Now, as we will read, it talks about Baal Peor, right? This is the first occurrence that the god of Baal, and it comes out in the Hebrew Bible, who becomes the primary antagonist to Yahweh for the hearts of the Israelites. In the latter half of the late Bronze Age, Baal was emerging as one of the major operative deities in Canaan. From the Ugaritic text, Baal was the agent of the creative order who, with his consort Anath, defeated the forces of evil, namely Yamsu, the sea, and Mot, the death, and Lotan, the Leviathan, the sea monster. Baal was a lesser-known deity in Mesopotamia during the early Bronze Age and in the beginning of the Middle Bronze Patriarchal period. Milgram simply states that the patriarchs did not know him. His first appearance as a prominent deity in Canaan surfaced in Hyksos period texts from Egypt in the latter half of the Middle Bronze Age. So that's a little bit of what we will talk about. We will see. Now, there is also the talk of the Pact of Priesthood, right, for all time. This covenant is one of the 5 issued by God. The promise to Noah that humanity will not be destroyed, the promise of seed and soil to Abraham, the Torah to Moses and Israel, and the dynasties to Pinchas and David. It constitutes another royal gift bestowed upon the high priest, who, like the king, wears special robes and a crown and is anointed, which is interesting, right? Now, also, he does make expiation, or rather ransoming, by means of his passion, the kin'ah. Pinchas provided a ransom for Israel, and God's wrath was assured so too when the Levitical guard cuts down the encroacher on God's sancta. He also provides a ransom that stays God's wrath from venting itself upon Israel. Phinehas, as chief of the Levitical guards, now fulfills this Levitical function. The Midianites, and this is something that we will read, but these are all points that we will see in this Torah portion as a quick introduction review of 10 minutes. We will see that the Midianites, since it was a Moabite woman who seduced the Israelites, an interesting question will arise. Why are Midianites assailed, or are we hostile to them? This episode may reflect that the period when Moab was part of a Midianite confederation that embraced all Transjordan as it protectorated when Israel conquered Sihon's territory. It served as the king's highway and thereby threatened the Midianites' hold on the vital spice trade. Thus, Midian, Israel's erstwhile ally, now became its implacable foe. And this is something that we have to see. This is why we're going to be introduced to the situation that Pinchas encounters, because this is what leads to the plague. This is what leads to his actions on behalf of Adonai, which might be or might not be so popular, but the text was clear and says that he was, defending God's honor. So we will go into the Torah portion and read and see what happens, right? And elaborate a little bit on this, and then we'll close out. While Israel remained as Shittim, the people began to play the harlot with the daughters of Moab. For they invited the people to sacrifice of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel joined themselves to Baal Peor, and the Lord was angry against Israel. The Lord said to Moses, "Take all the leaders of the people and execute them in broad daylight before the Lord, so that the fierce anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel." So Moses said to the judges of Israel, "Each of you slay his men who have joined themselves to Baal Peor. Then behold, one of the sons of Israel came and brought to his relative a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses and in the sight of all congregation of the sons of Israel, while they were sweeping at the doorway of the tent of meeting. When Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, saw it, he arose from the midst of the congregation and took a spear in his hand. And he went after the man of Israel. I highlighted how important was Pinchas or Phinehas' actions, right? Defending God's honor, standing for his honor in the midst of chaos, while the community was crying and in distress due to the fact that they had turned, right? It says that they bowed down to Baal Peor, that they offered sacrifices, and that they had basically turned their backs on God and started basically cheating in their especially in their ritual acts to this God of the nations. And they had betrayed Yarah. And so the community was in crying. Moses was in disarray, and nobody was reacting to this. And Pinchas, when these people were coming into a tent, and they were not necessarily going into the tabernacle, but they had a tent in the midst of the community, and it was already bad enough that they were worshiping Baal Peor inside the community itself, in the presence of Adonai. And so when they were about to commit this ritual sexual act, Pinchas impels them, right? He throws a spear and kills this prince and princess, which is a Midianite. And so as we read on the PowerPoint quickly, we saw that they had a treaty in which they were involved. And so they basically teamed up to help or make Israel stumble, because as of right now, Israel was being powerful. Remember, Israel destroyed Sihon and Og, and Balaam and Balak were not able to ritually curse the people. They cannot touch them because God says there's no divination or magic or anything or sorcery that can penetrate Israel, because they were represented by Yarah, and if they were doing the right thing, nothing was going to get in the way of God's blessing and protection. But they figured out that even though ritually and spiritually you will not be able to attack them, physically you can entice them to stumble and sin, and that is what they did now. And so I think that's one of the most important aspects of this Torah portion, and it is that it is from within that we have to keep ourselves in check. But before we continue with this, I will finish reading because we have a couple verses to go. So then it says, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, has turned away my wrath from the sons of Israel, and that he has or was jealous with my jealousy among them, so that I did not destroy them and the sons of Israel in my jealousy. Therefore I say, behold, I give him my covenant of peace, and it shall be for him and his descendants after him a covenant, a perpetual priesthood, because he was jealous for his God and made atonement for his sons of Israel. Now the name of the slain man Israel, who was slain with the Midianite woman, was Simri, the son of Salu, a leader of a father's household among the Simeonites. The name of the Midianite woman who was slain was Cosbi, the daughter of Zur, who was head of the peoples of the fathers of household in Midian. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Be hostile to the Midianites and strike them, for they have been hostile to you, with their tricks with which they have decided or deceived you in the affair of Peor. In the affair of Cosbi, the daughter of the leader of Midian, their sister, who was slain on the day of the plague because of Peor. And so, obviously, there is the aspect of how Pinchas, that one man, was able to stand for God's honor, and he was blessed. He was given a covenant of friendship, or in the Hebrew says Brit Shalom, covenant of peace. One of that is mentioned in Isaiah chapter 54, verse 10, Ezekiel, I don't know what chapter exactly, but it is something that is spoken, is highlighted throughout Scripture. Covenant of peace, meaning that God will be with him and will represent him and defend him and his descendancy. And he's given him a priesthood covenant too. And it's interesting that, we can highlight that because it's very positive, but sometimes the most important aspect of these stories is where the faults are so that we're able to manage how we act and how we maintain that which keeps us in a safe place in which there's no curse, no divination that will touch our homes, touch our communities. But it has to be something that we focus on within, that we're not leaving cracks in ourselves, in our families, in our communities. And that takes a lot of introspection and understanding that we're not perfect, and we're not nowhere near that. Our journey in the desert is not done. We have not reached the promised land. We have not reached that time in which Messiah has already arrived and the temple is rebuilt. So there's a lot of work that we have to do. And I think the biggest opportunity and the biggest challenge we have is the morality, and how different are we? How truly different are we from the world? How better can we be as a community to be different in a good way, in a positive way, so that we're not enticed and we're not so vulnerable to stumble as Israel was in this moment. There's nothing better than honoring Yod He Vav He. And if we're not consistent, if we're not focused, and if we're not determined to do that, then we will stumble and we will be enticed. And we can be blinded even in our comfort and our complacency, thinking that we are doing everything we can, but we're just doing most of it. We're not doing our best. And Pinchas demonstrated that he has zealous, and he was willing to go out of his way and make a decision that you can judge as extreme, but it was the necessary measure in the moment to establish peace and save his people. And in this case was zealousy and jealousy for God's honor, and in many cases it would be doing mercy and justice and righteousness, and all of it is to exalt Yod He Vav He. And as long as we do that, then there will be light, and there will be somewhere that it will be manifested that there is one true living God in a community. So stay focused, stay determined, be jealous, be zealous of God's honor, and He will be there for us and protect us. So that's all I got. It's a very little. If you hear my kids in the background, I'm sorry. So have a great week. Shavua Tov. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.